Why is it our musicians can't get paid? Why is it so hard to have in a $1 billion industry for a normal person who's great at what they do to call it their profession? Why is that so fucking hard?
Okay, welcome to the StageLeft podcast, lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. This podcast exists to provide free educational content for young musicians entering an increasingly complex industry by telling the stories of some of the unsung heroes behind the success. So go to the StageLeftPodcast.com for all episodes featuring musicians who discuss in detail the recording, writing and performing processes with the likes of Guns N' Roses, Elvis Presley, Kraftwerk, the Beatles, David Bowie, Beyonce, Fleetwood Mac, Nick Cave, Bob Dylan and the Stone Roses. Today we're joined by the chair of the prestigious Ivor Novellos and founding member of Gomez, Tom Gray, who's doing more to try to change the music industry than most through his Broken Records campaign, which is backed by the Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney and many more, to ensure fairer distribution of streaming royalties to artists at every level. Currently, an artist would need 62 million streams on Spotify to break even on a budget of 25k. This needs to change and Tom is leading the way. Today we'll be taking a deep dive into this topic, hearing how we listeners can help. We'll be discussing Whippin Piccadilly and how Ivor Novellos choose their winners. There'll be no pussyfooting around. So it's a pleasure to say that our guest today on the StageLeft podcast is none other than Tom Gray of Gomez. Thanks for joining us today, Tom. How's it going?
Very well, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. So, chair of the Ivor Novellos, how's that title sitting with you?
It's a little strange. We used to be called the British Association of Songwriters and Composers, which is probably a better description of what we are. But because everybody knows us because of the Ivor Novello Awards, changing our name to the Ivor's Academy of Creators was a decision we made because people are always kind of confused about the distinction between the two things. But here we are. We exist to represent songwriters and composers, to protect their interests, fight for their rights, lobby for them, provide services. We are a classic professional association in many ways. The fact that a lot of people don't realize that we exist is calamitous, because people need to know that we exist, because that is what we're here for. And people should be members. And it's a brilliant organization which has a 40-person Senate, which is fully elected by the membership. And that Senate discusses everything from education to the issues around songs being used in shows, songs being used in TV and film, compositional issues, compositional contracts. At every stage up and down the industry, people, young and old, people sit on that Senate. It's really a brilliantly vivid, dynamic organization, and it's a huge honor to be given the keys to the car.
We recently had Kate Nash on the podcast, and we were supposed to be talking about a film that she was in, and I asked her, how do you think the music industry should change? And we never even got to the topic of the film, because she just reeled off all of this stuff. And I think a lot of what you're talking about would, I think young artists need to know that organisations like yourselves exist, so that they don't feel so in the dark, and the exploitation that can happen, and sharks and that kind of thing. In regards to you taking on this role, we often speak to artists about imposter syndrome, and it's a really interesting topic with artists. Did you have any imposter syndrome going into this role?
Yeah, I'm a total imposter in every single sense. I am just some mouthy northern twat who people allow to do shit for some reason. It's very confusing, to be fair. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I think my entire career is pretty much an imposter thing. It's a curious. I started off. I mean, I love Kate, by the way. Should say Kate Nash. I had some, Kate was lent into Broken Record quite a lot, and we had some brilliant chats over COVID, and checking in with each other. She is fierce, and I think she's just an unbelievable person. No, I started off studying, when I was a kid, I was studying politics. I was really into politics. I joined the Labour Party when I was 15. I thought I was going to have a career in politics because it was just the thing that came most naturally to me. But I used to go round to the corner to my mate's dad's garage and record music with my mates who lived down the road from me for fun. That's what we did. We used to make tapes. And we never performed live. We became masters of this little 4-track machine, and we used to make like we, I think the most things the instruments we managed to record individually on a 4-track was something in about 36. We figured out, we became absolute kings of bouncing. Anyway, that's a tangent. But anyway, that band very suddenly got offered record contracts just as I was about to go and work in, to work in politics in America. And I was like, do I go into politics or do I go on a big adventure with my mates? And I went on a big adventure with my mates. And here I am, 27 years later or whatever it is. So, and that was Gomez. And so it's kind of, even then, at the beginning of my career, becoming a musician was not an intentional thing. It was very much like, oh, I take an enormous amount of joy in this and pleasure in it. And therefore I'm just going to go there and find out.
If you hadn't made that sliding doors decision, right, and decided to go to America to follow politics, where would you be now geographically and professionally, do you think?
I don't think there's any doubt that I would have ended up being some kind of policy wonk in the Blair government.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would have been. There's no question that would have happened to me. It was where I was headed. I'd come through at the same time as a lot of people who ended up being quite senior in Labour. And I kind of had the chops to do it. And it was, I just didn't. And who knows where that would have led now? That would have been a lot of up and down since then. You'd probably be a lobbyist for somebody awful, like a petrochemical company or something. I don't know what would have happened to me. I think
in the parallel universe, who would have been the Alistair Campbell character in your world, having chosen to go into the world of music?
I don't know. It's a curious thing for me. I think the thing for me is that obviously when I sat down after being touring with the band consistently for about 15 years in 2013, I kind of went, deep breath. I had a 5-year-old son at the time. So it was all school runs, and you know how that goes. And I was starting to do, and I'd flipped my career into doing like TV music and, theatre work and stuff like this. I'd been very lucky in terms of people I'd bumped into outside pubs and things, and people had given me jobs in other areas. It's kind of the story of my life, is just like coincidences and bumping into people. And I kind of, after a couple of years of doing that, went, no, there can't be many people like me who have been in the music industry for nearly 20 years, have worked on every aspect of what that career looks like in terms of as a composer, as a working songwriter, as a member of a band. I even managed Gomez at varying points, and
Did you?
Yeah, and negotiated record contracts. I say managed, but basically we didn't have management, and were a moment where we had to still do things and make things happen, and that was all that generally fell to me to do. Because even though I was the youngest in the band, I'm the one sat in the head corner of the room going, no, lads, that's not what we should do. A lot of the time, which can be annoying for people who are creative. But I knew what record contracts looked like. I knew, I'd done get 1,000. I knew what gig settlements looked like. I knew what everything was, but I also curiously had this political background, and I was like, well, there can't be many people like me who've done all of this and know politicians and know how to work all of that stuff too. So I probably am going to have to be that guy. It's a funny thing, because even though I don't feel in any way qualified to be this person, I did realize in a curious way that I was the only person who could do it.
That's interesting because you just said you didn't feel qualified, but you spent about 3 minutes explaining how you are the most qualified person to do this, right? And most imposter syndrome comes from a place of where people have a gap in their knowledge. They fear being exposed, right? And so they're kind of like, I hope I don't get rumbled for not knowing this particular thing. So it's interesting. You kind of this interesting balance between actually you are the most qualified. You kind of know you are, or you've got something to offer. But I wonder what that imposter syndrome is. Is it I don't know, people who've previously done it or people who've done it for decades or, who've been involved in the music industry in that way are different to you in some way. I don't know.
I think it's a curious thing. What I always want is, and what I hope the world is loads of brilliant people doing brilliant things. And that's what I want the world to be, right? And internally, and I've internalized that, right? But the problem is the world isn't lots of brilliant people doing brilliant things, right? And it turns out that there's a lot of people of very average intellect doing very average things in quite senior roles all over the place. And sometimes it can be quite shocking that you are the person sat in the room who knows the most on a subject, simply because you're the one who's sort of looked around all the edges the most because you weren't limited to only looking at it from one perspective or, something else. But it's really quite, it worries me sometimes that I'm as expert as I am. I feel like there ought to be people who are way more expert than me taking care of this stuff. It's very curious to me. That feels like that ought to exist, but maybe it doesn't.
And interesting, you talked about that dynamic in the band, that you'd be the person in the corner who would say, actually, we should do things in a different way. And now you're doing that in the music industry. If you were to advise someone who's in a similar situation where they think, okay, there's all these senior people who are paid more than me perhaps, or whatever it might be, and I know more about them, often people don't lift their head above the parapet, right? And they go into their shell. What would you say to someone to have the confidence to actually speak up in that situation, give their vantage point?
No idea or person ever got anywhere without being championed, right? And you've just got to make a choice whether you're going to be your own champion or not sometimes. You've really just got to, because you can't just sit there waiting for that bus to arrive, because it won't, right? It just won't. And it's very hard for people. And it's very hard for me. I find it quite hard to sell myself. And in that sense, it feels very uncomfortable. It feels very tasteless. But some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth speaking up about. And you have to, when you know that they are, take that step. And I have all kinds of problems with anxiety and stuff like that. So it's not easy for me. I was not a person who enjoyed live performance particularly. I was good at it, I think. I can be entertaining, but it wasn't natural to me to stand on a stage and want to perform or to speak in front of people or to doing those things. And to this day, I struggle with it. But I guess, I'm just very, very driven by a sense of moral and creative, I don't know. I feel like there's a momentum in the world, and you have to be part of it. And it's like, and that's really, anyone who's been successful in music or successful in pretty much anything will tell you that there's a kind of feeling in doing something great where you sort of feel like you are riding the sort of the zeitgeist. You're in touch with the mass consciousness. You have grappled something from the ether which feels bigger than you, which you are somehow riding, right? And that's the really key thing, is to have your aerials out and know when that moment is, and to be able to fly with it. And if you're not ready to step out, unless you're ready to go, unless you're ready to be that champion, you're never gonna take the ride. You're not gonna grab the reins, and it's not gonna happen, right?
So listeners to this will be in situations where they might have to like sell what they do a little bit to people they meet, etc. Oh, I'm this and that. And I agree. Like, I almost cringe at the idea of having to do that. And I have to do that with this podcast. And this is a podcast and blah, blah, blah. And I'm physically on camera now, I'm cringing at the process, at having to do that. And it's that tasteless word. It feels really tasteless, right? So what would you advise someone to be able to get across what they do if they're brilliant at something? And there'll be listeners to this who are brilliant musicians, whatever they might be, artists, but to not feel so like they're being tasteless or arrogant or overconfident in stating it in that brief meeting.
I think what's really important to remember is lots of really mediocre people get a very long way by selling themselves. and all that's going to happen if you don't do it is you're going to be behind them. And that's a choice, right? It's just a choice. And you don't have to do it in the most annoying way. You don't have to. It's not a sales pitch. It's not a deck. It's not it's not the shop front. It's having the confidence to speak about things that you care about, like you care about them, right? If you care about something, don't fear. Do not be embarrassed about that. Believe it, because it's true to you, and why would you not? A lot of people worry too much about other people's perceptions, but the point of artistry is to not worry about other people's perceptions. That is literally the antithesis of artistry. So be an artist.
Nice, thank you. Now, something you care a lot about is obviously the work you do with Broken Records. And what Broken Records, the campaign was to seek fair remuneration for music creators, especially for streaming. I can't think there's a single person listening to this wouldn't agree with that. Now, you wrote a letter to Boris Johnson, who was Prime Minister at the time, about this, and you got loads of 200 people to sign it, including Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney, Kate Bush, Chris Martin, and people like Ed O'Brien from Radiohead kind of really championed you for doing that. What impact did that have, do you feel?
Well, it started a government process. I mean, Broken Record led to an inquiry in Parliament that was called the Economics of Streaming. And, it's because, when I started campaigning, I knew varying Labour politicians and, very quickly a brilliant MP who shouldn't be, who everybody should know the name of, a guy called Kevin Brennan, who's a Cardiff MP. And these days a very close friend of mine. We have a bigger group of sort of mutual mates and people who love music and who are political and have been around it forever. And in a sort of indirect way, I guess he was following me. I was following him. He started seeing all the things that we were doing, all the work we were doing, bringing the Musicians Union in as well, which is very close to his heart. And then, so he kind of went to his select committee and said, we should look at this because he could see it blowing up. And so, very quickly we went from being a social media campaign to being in Parliament. And I was the first witness in this inquiry, right? I was the first person up setting out the argument. I mean, what a position, nice. What a gift. I mean, what a gift. And, that came up with that they interviewed the heads of the major labels. It's very worth going back and watching that. It's one of the most cringeworthy things you'll ever see. And they came up with a report which said that the music industry needed a complete reset. Right. It goes into like a lot of detail as to how it should be reset, but it said it needs to be reset. So we had that. We also wrote some Boris Johnson, and obviously he went, got an awful lot of coverage. I mean, if we had Paul McCartney, we had, Yoko Ono, Olivia Harrison signed it as well. We were only missing Ringo Starr. It was mad who was on that list. It was absolutely mad. And so they felt it. They felt the pressure, and they started a government process, which we are still in. And you know, we just got the announcement they are starting a working group into creator remuneration. They committed to that, you know, a week ago. So
what are their biggest challenges for that reset? Would it be the fact that you almost it's got to be an international thing that everyone has to agree to?
not at all. Not at all.
Okay, that's good.
It doesn't need to be at all. Spain has a completely different remuneration system to the UK.
Really? Right.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's already happening differently in different countries, and you know, we left Europe just as it brought through a thing called the Copyright Directive, and that had in it a thing about fair and proportionate remuneration for creators, and different countries across Europe are interpreting that as needing a different way of paying people from streaming. So it's a kind of we were riding a moment politically where we know that the UK is falling behind in terms of its copyright reform. And copyright, let's be very clear to anyone who's listening who doesn't really understand this. The way that we all get paid in music is via a thing called copyright. Without copyright, there is no money, right? Your performance, your song, all of this stuff is part of a framework around copyright, which means that you get paid. So you change the rules of copyright, you change the way we get paid. And that's really what it needs to be understood here. Kevin Brennan, after we'd sent the letter and we had done the economics of streaming, there was a brilliant moment when Kevin rings me and he says, there's a thing in Parliament called the private members' bills, where individual members of Parliament are allowed to try and pass legislation themselves through Parliament. They almost never get through, but it's a brilliant opportunity to have a big debate in Parliament and cause a fuss. And he says, you know, should I put but it's a lottery, right? Whether they win it or not. And he said, should I put my name in for the lottery? And I went, Kevin, yes, absolutely. Like, get a ticket, whatever it is you have to do. And first time in, you know, his 20-odd parliamentary career, he won. I mean, another extraordinary piece of luck. He won it. And then so he got to write a bill setting out model copyright reform, which, you know, was brilliant. We got loads of incredible people from around the world to help contribute to this bill that would have changed. You know, it didn't get through, but it led to a massive debate in Parliament. It led to the government basically saying, we're going to do something about this. We're gonna, you know, we understand there's a problem. We're not going to look away from it. So it's kind of, that helped push things forward massively as well. So we had a sort of flurry over 2 years of just all of these events happening, just pushing it over the hill. And, you know, the difficult thing about how it would get resolved is that, you know, we've got a Conservative government, right? Mm-hmm. They don't really care about musicians, let's be honest, in any vocal way. And haven't shown an enormous amount of interest in protecting creatives and creators. But they do recognise that there is a huge distortion in this market. You have got a problem when the head of a major record label is paying themselves 250 million quid and the average person working in the industry is earning, you know, less than 20,000 quid a year, right? That's bonkers. It's deeply upside down. It doesn't really make much sense. And so they do appreciate that something needs to be resolved. The issue we have is that their process of resolving that is to bring all of the stakeholders into a room, right? And of course, some of those stakeholders are very wealthy and very powerful, and others like us are just scrappy creator groups with not much money but an awful lot of will. And so it's hard to get significant compromise from a process that looks like that, because, you know, the truth is it's a zero sum. if creators get paid more, somebody else has to get paid less, right? And that will not come to a surprise to anybody listening to this. They'll be like, well, fucking obviously. That's fucking obvious, isn't it not? It's like, oh, there's a certain amount of money. These people aren't getting paid enough of it. It's going to have to come from somebody, right? Now, nobody else wants to give up any money. Nobody else is technically allowed to because of shareholders, right? So their position is, as their jobs, and then this is the whole problem we experience in the world. This isn't a music problem, is that public corporations, publicly floated corporations, are, if they were people, they would be psychopaths, right?
Yeah.
They are psychotic. They are not working for the interests of people. They're working for the interests of an unemotional monster that just wants to keep growing, right? It's a virus.
I think you're saying there's a film called Corporation, isn't there? And they said they did that as an experiment. And they said that if you were to take an analytic of an individual and put it to a corporation, the result would be a psychopath. Yeah, that's really interesting stuff.
Right. So that's it. And it's it's really problematic. And it's really problematic for the people who work for these organizations because, you know, they're not bad people, but their job is to protect the profits and the market share of the psychopath. Right.
Out of interest, if you had the person who, you know, is earning £250 million, kind of, you know, not exploiting, but, you know, you could argue they're exploiting the situation, exploiting all these artists. What would their argument be? What's their rationale? I guess they know it's unfair and they don't care, which is a very easy thing for us to all assume. But out of interest, have they been asked about this and what would their rationale be? Because I think to negotiate with, you know, something through this, you've got to really know where the other person's coming from. And do they have any kind of rationale or argument for why they do things in this way?
They just see themselves as running a business.
Yeah,
they don't like, I run a business. We make loads of money. People in the classically in the entertainment area, CEOs massively overpay themselves. So if you compare any entertainment company to other corporations based on their scale, they are massively overpaying themselves. And the you know, the governance of these organizations is really poor. So shareholders don't really have much say over how these people get paid because the governance of major labels within the organizations which own them and et cetera, means that these people are pretty protected. So they can...
The governance where? Is that in every country? That's why I brought in the international thing earlier. Like, is there an issue that this, you know, Spotify's, you know, organization that, you know, people can stream everywhere in the world? So are there problems with the fact that it's international? Or...
No. This is very specifically the governance of that organization. So like in a company, technically speaking, you know, it's crazy to me, right? The intention is in shareholdership companies is that shareholders can get in a room and can challenge the way that the company is being run, right? Mm-hmm. But, you know, take, for instance, Daniel Ek at Spotify. He cannot be removed as chief executive by his shareholders because of the way that the organization is set up. It's technically impossible. And it's curious to me internationally that we have allowed companies to be set up in this way. And I think that's very Silicon Valley, actually. There's a lot of companies like that. It ought to, as far as I'm concerned, that should just be illegal because these people don't feel any external pressure. And that's dangerous because not only are these people running what are in effect psychopathic organizations, but they themselves don't feel the human external pressure of what might be understood as sort of misbehavior, right?
So what are the options then to make it desirable for them to change?
Well, the only thing that can make them change is legislation.
Yeah.
Right, which is why, you know, why did I start a campaign to get politics moving around this? Because the only thing that these organizations fear is legislation and regulation. They do not fear musicians. They do not fear public opinion. They fear the rules of the game changing on them, right? So that's what we have to use. And because we are right, it's well worth having the fight. And this is just where we stand. It's like, and it's hard, because, governments struggle with this stuff because they say, oh, it's about money coming into the tax man and da 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 da. But the truth is that the brilliant thing we have about music is that music, if we have a more rich, successful musical community, we know, and I think every musician knows this, that we will have happier communities, we will have happier high streets, we will have happier schools. If you invest in music, if you make music more part of people's lives, people are going to be happier, right? And allowing people the basic ability to thrive from the fruit of their musical labor is pretty straightforward. It's not hard. We're not asking a lot.
It's really interesting you say that. So I'm a mental health first aid trainer, and I train people on how to support people going through a mental health crisis. And one of the things that's really interesting is that one of the biggest preventative things you can do is expose someone to arts and culture. And arts and culture is one of the protective factors around someone experiencing ultimately poor mental health. And if we strip that away, and you're right, a lot of Tory governments just strip that away each time, and then there's a mental health crisis, and we have to find funding and support, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, you're absolutely right on that. In regards to the last thing I would say about the streaming thing is, what could our listeners, because I think every single person listening to this would agree that it's completely unfair and that's not right. So what could we do other than cancelling our Spotify subscription? What else can we do
absolutely
to help you?
Don't cancel your Spotify subscription. That's bullshit. Spotify's great. Keep Spotify. Like, Spotify's made life brilliant. Like, what are you talking about? Like, streaming is wonderful. The thing that you can do is really, really boring. It's really boring, and it's going to take some time out of your day. Is write a physical letter to your member of parliament. It is an age-old thing. It's not an email. It's not a fucking email that'll get lost in a thing. It's a physical letter to your member of parliament. Imagine that. A piece of paper, you write 50 words on it, you stick a stamp on it, and you put it in a letterbox. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but what's amazing is how few people do it. Right. And what we have is, in this country, is a representative democracy, right? If your MP gets a letter, they have to do something about it. If you go into their surgery and talk to them and say, I want to talk to you about music, they will give you a conversation. If you go into their clinic, talk to their face, talk to them. These people respond to their constituents' demands and needs. That's their job. And I know it's very easy for people to just complain about politics and to wave it off and to say, oh, they don't care and it's all the same and they're all the same and blah, 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 blah. But it's just not true. These people are just human beings. They know what their job is. A lot of them are quite good people, even from when they're on the opposite side of politics to you, who, if nothing else, have a sense of civic duty. And we should never forget that. And part of their public service is to listen to their constituents, right? So take advantage of that. Go and talk to these people and say, what are you doing? Why are we letting music, this thing that we are absolutely, undoubtedly the world leaders in, right? As a small country with, it's lunatic how great our music is, right? How is it that we're letting this thing rot on the vine? Why is it our schools haven't got music in anymore? Why is it our musicians can't get paid? Why is it so hard to have in $1 billion industry for a normal person who's great at what they do to call it their profession? Why is that so fucking hard? Right? All of those questions need answers. I just think people don't realize the power of their own voice.
Hi, this is John Woff, the saxophonist with the 1975, and you're listening to the StageLeft podcast.
What else needs to change in the music industry away from this topic?
Oh, so much, you know. Women need to be massively more protected, and safe spaces need to be understood much better. And a lot of men with very outdated ideas need to leave the industry.
Yep. I mean, that was Kate's answer was basically sack a lot of people in the music industry.
I mean, she's got a fair point. You know, there's a lot of like toxic stuff that hasn't been dealt with because there's a whole layer of people who shouldn't still be there and should actually just get out of the way. And I think Kate's got a point.
How do we address the gender pay gap?
I mean, it's very, very hard, isn't it? We're all individual negotiators. The whole problem that we have in music is there is no collective bargaining. So we can't go, well, nobody's going to, we only know what we individually get paid, and then exposing what everyone else is getting paid is quite hard to see. So, you know, the something that ought to be very simple to fix is in fact incredibly complicated to fix, because we're all freelancers who are just challenging for whatever's on the table. So I don't know how you fix it. Is the basic, but a lot of these things I don't know quite what the solution is. We can certainly bring in protections. I mean, I actually think that just getting rid of NDAs altogether would be a kind of a step in the right direction. But any NDA which prevents anyone from talking about how they've been paid or what they're getting paid shouldn't really be there, because there needs to be the ability to have comparative discussions about pay.
It's really interesting. There's a lot of studies around this. So with the gender pay gap, and this isn't the music industry necessarily, but it's interesting. Between men and women who choose not to have kids or don't have kids or can't have kids, it's about a 5% difference, which that should be zero, by the way. But the drop off massively is if women choose to have kids, right? So it's like, and I know people on tours with massive bands at the moment who are like, I can't say they are or where they're playing, but they're huge bands. And they said they are dreading going because they're going to be away from their kids, and they've got young, you know, their mother to young kids and that kind of thing. And then have to make this choice about their career or not. Can you ever see a situation where someone isn't in that position where they can still further their career, take those opportunities, so they end up being that top of a bill in a few years' time, and still being a mother at the same time?
I think what's really troubling is the whole direction of travel is that it's become more difficult just to do the job, because there isn't as much surplus income in the system to pay for all the other stuff, right? So
yeah, being
able to afford to take your kid with you and pay a nanny while you're out, excuse me, might not have that, you know, the idea, because so many tours are barely breaking even at the moment. You know, if people are trying to make, there's so many decisions that, you know, do we reduce production levels? Do we reduce this? Do we reduce that? And then it just comes down to the basics of like, can I be a mom? Right? There has to be money in the system to allow that person to actually to be a decision, right? Because if you haven't got the economic freedom to make that decision, then you're screwed, aren't you? So you've got to, so this is where the economics becomes something that might seem directly gendered or like a power thing, may simply be an economic problem. And that is shit. Because like, they're just, you know, I mean, people who are successful at this thing, right, ought to be able to pay for things, because there ought to be money in the system. It's just it's quite a shocking thing when you think about these people who've got hundreds of thousands of fans all over the planet, and somehow that does not translate into income. It's sort of mind blowing.
It blows my mind, right? So where does the money go? So I have this conversation with my dad all the time. We'll go to the O2 or something. It's, there's 20,000 people there, and it's like, okay, so and so only earned this amount of money from playing that. It's like, how is that possible? They're all paying 60 quid a ticket. Where is that money going?
Well, there's a lot of layers into it, isn't there? But if you look at where the money goes from one ticket that you've bought, and you look at Ticketmaster, and you go all down the road in terms of where the money is coming out before it gets to the person who's on the stage, and then you consider the extraordinary costs and production level of putting on a show like that. It's just not what you'd think it is. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just not what you think it is. And
for listeners who are particularly interested in this topic, they should go back and listen. We had Stuart Lee, the comedian, on, and he talked about how a £10 DVD a few years ago, how he would only get 13 pence from it, and he kind of explained how where the rest of those pence went. I guess it's a similar situation. I want to talk about Ivor Novello's with you. Mm-hmm. How do the Academy choose their winners and who's going to be the fellowship, which Sting got this year? How is that chosen when it's obviously subjective?
So it's very difficult is the answer, and complicated, and involves an awful lot of rigor. So we ask people a public wide announcement goes out asking for nominations. Right now, you can nominate yourself. Anyone can nominate. But of course, what tends to happen is publishers nominate stuff that they're trying to really push, right, in any given year, because they're geared up to do that. That's what they're trying to. But they just take advantage of it. They put things out there that are really popular and really successful and brilliant forward. So the majority of the stuff we receive tends to come from there, right? But like as I say, it is a completely open nomination. Anyone can put in a work, right? So it's very important to know that if you're an Ivor member, you can do it. It's just show us your songs, right? Then that goes to a committee. No, so first, I think that first of all, there's like a blind. I forget quite how the selection process happens after that, but it eventually ends up in a committee of people who are selected, but no one knows that. And it changes every year. So you ask people to participate, and it'll be like, I remember when I did it, it was like, who was on my group? It was Skin from Skunk Anansie was on there, Felix White, loads of people, Tom Robinson. It was a really mad mix of people. It's really cool because it's like, 12 Angry Men, you're in a room and you basically have to decide who the winner is. And everybody comes in thinking something different, and you have a big row for like a day, and then you decide who it is. And I did that years ago. And that's how it gets decided. It gets decided by a room of your peers who kind of go, this is who it should be. But
what are the metrics? Is it originality? Is it progressiveness? Is it the craft of songwriting? Is it using unusual chord sequences? What is the metrics?
So everybody in that room will come in with their own metrics, right? Because like what they're about, right? So if I'm in a room, I'm all about originality and self-expression, right? That's what I'm about. That's what I believe in, right? But somebody else comes in who has a completely different attitude to me, who knocks out 20 tracks a day. What they're thinking about can be completely different to me, right? But we have to come to a decision together. And that's the brilliant thing about humans, right? Is that you just have to kind of come to a compromise. Everything is compromised, like in life. Like I always say to my son, the first thing you'll learn about me is I'm a hypocrite. Right? It's like life is life is complicated. And you know, we have certain awards which are very, very, you know, like most performed work is literally the most performed work. You're adding together all of the metrics that are out there and saying this is the song which was played the most in the country on radio stations, on streaming, across everything. This is the one, right? Most played in shops and hairdressers, and that's most performed work. Nobody decides that. That is the most performed work, right? And then there's ones which are in the gift of the board where we kind of go, who's like, and there's only a few of those. Well, one is like the fellowship, which, you know, only a few people have had. Sting got it this year. Kate Bush has had it. You know, McCartney's got it. It's like, you know, that's our big one. That's like, who's in the firmament. And then our special and international one, where we can sort of pick anybody from the other side of the world and kind of go, who represents what we're about, and would be a great person to give an award to. And so that's really it. All I can say is that I wish Fran was here to actually, who's our brilliant head of awards, who is so fiercely rigorous about how the awards get done. It's like I'm not allowed near it, right? So like people like me who are elected or whatever, I'm like completely clean away from it. Apart from those like the fellowship and stuff, I have no say. So people still hilariously try and lobby me, and I'm like, I don't have anything to do with this. It's not me. This is a process, which is like, you know, double blind. You know, like what's interesting, I think, is that, you know, the reasons for giving an award are many. And I think sometimes it's right to reflect the zeitgeist. It's right to reflect that a song has entered the popular culture, and even if I don't like the song, it's the job of a song can be something different to my taste, right? And I think that's really important to understand, is that a lot, especially when it comes, I mean, awards are a funny thing, right? I mean, one of the things that really launched my career was winning the Mercury Prize, right?
Big moment.
Big moment.
I watched your interview after getting it the other day. Yeah, it was funny. Yeah, it was. I don't think you said in the interview you weren't expecting to be nominated, or like that was a bit of a shock, and then to win it was just completely out of the. Yeah,
I was 21 years of age, mate. I mean, it was nuts, and but I've always, you know, it's quite a funny thing that I'm now the chair of the Ivors Academy, because I've always been incredibly cynical about awards. I just think I've always said that they're just kind of ridiculous, and we shouldn't really. I don't think it's probably good for people that we give people prizes and stuff. But I think that for me, the really brilliant thing about the awards is that they give us this opportunity and this incredible platform to talk about songs and songwriting and the importance to society of those things, and to get people in the room, like politicians, and and go, look, this is what we do. This represents us reflecting on what we do, right? So sometimes when I talk to younger people, they get very like upset about, why do these people get these awards, and why do these people get those awards, and what have you? And I'm kind of like, you need to think of it like this. In many ways, it doesn't matter who gets the award. What matters is songs are being celebrated. Songwriting is being celebrated. What you have chosen to do with your life is being revered and considered, right? And that is the key to it, right? And so it's a little bit strange, because you know the kind of music I made and where I come from. I'm not someone who came from commercial songwriting in any stretch of the imagination. I was never an ABA kind of a guy.
You can tell that, like, if you listen to, I was listening to Gomez's entire back catalogue in the last couple of days, and that's very noticeable. And I think that's possibly why you won the Mercury in the year that you did. You know, it was on the back of a lot of those chord sequences that you could predict the next chord. It's like, I could never predict your next chord when I was listening to your stuff over, you know, which is really interesting.
Thanks, man. I mean, that was the game. We were just like, what's the cliche? Let's not do that. That was what we always used to say. Is like, what's the thing that you're supposed to do? Let's not do that. And that was always how we figured out what we should do, was by figuring out what everybody else would do, which was the most ridiculous, like, bite your nose off to spite your face kind of way of making music.
Because I bought it on CD as an 18-year-old, and my band used to do a cover of it. Can I ask you about Whippin Piccadilly and your memories of recording that?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And being involved in that.
Yeah.
Great song. For listeners' benefit, when we were talking earlier about how to kind of get your idea across, we exchanged numbers a few weeks ago, I left a voice note for Tom, and I thought, am I going to take this risk? And I spoke to my builder about it, because someone's doing some building in my house. I said, I'm going to play the opening chorus of Whippin Piccadilly to get his attention first thing in the morning after a late night. Great song. We used to go down well when we used to play it, as did it with you. Yeah, tell us about your memories of writing and recording that and being involved in that.
Well, you know, it's very. I mean, the song is very much Ian's, and but what I will say is the song is about a night where we travelled from Sheffield to Manchester to watch Beck play at the Manchester Academy.
Nice.
Many things may or may not have been imbibed, and our friend Mark, who's now a brilliant, highly successful physicist who lives in California, had removed the string from his coat, and he was whipping the floor of Piccadilly Station.
No.
Yeah. And that's what whipping Piccadilly means. And you know, the person dancing like a lunatic is Beck. I think the Kung Fu King might have been Mark as well. I think he, at one stage in the night in the Union Bar, started trying out his Kung Fu moves. I can't remember. My big contribution to that song was the so
what is that on? What did you?
So what happened was, Paulie had written the song, and I was like, and he'd done and he recorded a version of it, and it was cool, but it I don't know, it didn't sort of speak to the sort of the quirkiness of the thing, the sort of the innate oddness of the tale and the thing. So I was like mucking around, and I had this broken old drum machine, one of those ones which actually had like physical pads on it, some cheap Yamaha thing or something, that somebody had given it to me because it was sort of half broken, I think. I don't know how I'd gotten hold of it. I think it was like a mate of my dad's or somebody, so jettisoned it, and it didn't really work. But it did do this one beat, right? And I stuck the one beat that it did through a flanger pedal.
Right, that sounds right, yeah.
And it made that sound. And I said, Burley, let's just record. I felt so bad because Burley that had to play the whole song over, because we're recording to tape, so there was no like click, right? There was no click. So then we had to record all like 3 or 4 minutes of this awful sound, so that Borley plays over top. And in fact, if you listen to the original recording, you can kind of hear it faintly playing in the background, and that's because of the bleed on the 4-track tape, right? That's because at some point in the bounce, it's like it's left a ghost, right? And so he records over the whole thing, and just so that we can get these breaks where it does this stupid noise. because it had to be a stupid noise.
Yeah, but it builds up the tension for when it comes back in, and it's like straight on the snare afterwards. Like straight into it. So you need that. That bit's perfect for the song. That's
Yeah, that's it really.
Have you still got it? What you did it on?
No. It totally broke after that. The thing, on the 4-track that we were recording on, you had to balance a brick on the power supply to make it work. So we'd occasionally lose takes because the brick would fall off the power supply.
Whippin Piccadilly tonight.
So, 2 more questions about Gomez that
Yes.
I'd like to answer.
Yes.
And this is related to bands who are listening or young artists listening now. 3 lead vocals.
Yes, mate.
How do you, I can imagine lots of egos in there potentially. How do you ensure that everyone feels heard literally and metaphorically and doesn't feel drowned out by anyone else?
By being cool.
Mm.
There's not much to it. You just got to be cool. And, for me personally, I never wanted to sing. So I would always be, because I'm not much of a singer still to this day. Very pitchy. Don't really enjoy it. Love writing songs though. Just love writing songs. And so I would always try and get Ben to sing it. So Ben sang loads of my songs. And then occasionally Paulie would sing one of my songs as well. So it was nice, in that sense, because it was very collaborative. When it was working best, I know it didn't always work well, quite passive aggressive as a bunch of lads. But when it was working well, things that I was doing that, songs like, I don't know, Devil Will Ride or something like that. If it was exciting Bally, he'd just jump on it and he'd be like, he'd go. Or, like, I don't know, songs like, trying to think. There's so many songs, but look, it really is just about getting yourself out of the way. The big mistake the biggest mistake a creative can make is to put themselves in the way. The thing has to be the thing that making the thing as great and as brilliant as it can be should always be the intention. And the intention, and as soon as you get in the way of the intention by making it about you've fucked it. And whether that's by saying no, that's always a bad thing in a creative situation. People saying no, never say no. Always try everything and never push anyone back from something they want to try. Because everybody lives in that space. There's a small area in creative collaboration where everybody gets to breathe, and you've got to protect that bit fiercely. So yeah, it's hard, but you just need to fucking.
Gomez and Oasis were the 2 bands in my early years who had B-sides and A-sides that were indistinguishable in quality. as a band, what was your actual decision-making process? Because you had so many good songs that would be like Pussyfooting on Whippin Piccadilly, such a tune. How did you go about deciding that? And do you have any regrets that songs didn't get the platform that they might have done?
I think we were just so full of creativity. So absolutely just bursting with creativity that we didn't know how to do something that wasn't interesting to us. We just didn't know how to do it. The mere idea of making music that wasn't interesting to us was just weird. It's just so weird. Why would you do weak shit? Like, what? It was very strange that people find it weird at all. Yes, I absolutely. But the big sorry, can't clear my throat. The only real regret I have is that, and it's a real shame actually, is that, and this is really niche for the Gomez fans, is that after our second album, we'd been worked too hard. We'd done too much. And the guys, we didn't stop through our, we released Bring It On in 98. We released Liquid Skin in 99. So a year apart, 2 albums. And we also released like 6 singles which all at the time had 2 different versions, so there was like another 12 songs on top of that, maybe, that had been released. But we'd released like 36 tracks in like 2 years or something crazy. And we were touring like mad. And the guys were knackered. And I argued with them and said, this is the moment where we're supposed to not step away. But everyone was just too tired. And as a result, what we released after that was an EP called Machismo and a sort of weird hybrid record called The Abandoned Shopping Trolley Hotline. And the great sadness for me to this day is that the half of Abandoned Shopping Trolley Hotline that was original and the Machismo EP added together would have been the most brilliant Gomez album. And I think by us not releasing that, we screwed up the rest of our career. And that upsets me because it was kind of we were ultra confident at that moment in terms of the music we were making in the studio, and the absolute, just the whole cinema scope of the craziness that is Gomez is captured in those tracks, And I don't know if you're familiar with that EP or that record, but like if you take that stuff and you put it together, it's fucking insane. It's like, it's because, people who are familiar with my band, we were the most eccentric, silly ass band. Like we're just not, not in an arty sense, not in the Radiohead sense, in the just box of tricks, like people having fun with music sense. We just took so much joy in making weird things. That's the band that we were.
Would you do Gomez again?
It's hard, making time. But, we're always trying to. I noticed actually that while we were doing this, there was a missed call from Ben. I imagine that's him trying to make a new Gomez record, right? It probably is, to be fair.
For context, how often does he call you? An actual telephone call? Is that a really unusual occurrence? Okay.
It's not super unusual. It doesn't happen an awful lot. We live in a pretty similar neighborhood, so I'll occasionally just bump into him in the street, or maybe have a pint. But like, So but yeah, him ringing me up is probably something that needs talking about. It's like, oh shit, here he is. It's like, it's like when the house phone
Make
rings.
it happen. Make time if you can. But I know you've got a lot. You're changing the world for the better. So it's you can't be a superhero to everyone. But here's last few questions. What do you think, given your experience, what is an underrated skill or quality that every musician should have? That doesn't necessarily have to be technical to do with their instrument, for instance. But what's an underrated skill or quality you think every musician should have that is going to stand them in good stead going into the music industry?
That is quite a difficult question.
Thank you.
I am the opposite of somebody who thinks that it's important to be the best on your instrument or the best at anything musically, because I think that everything in music rests on the quality of your ideas, and that the quality of your ideas will always be the yardstick by which other people will judge you. And I also think that actually, and that's kind of the funny thing, because artistic vision, we always talk about, how revered these people are for their artistic vision. But it's kind of a curious thing that it gets so sort of forgotten in the sort of professionalization of our industry, and the way that music gets taught, because discovering a singularity of vision is the single hardest thing to do, and also the single most important thing to do. And I'm not sure it can be taught, but it's the only thing that I believe in. So for me, it's like, I don't get excited when I hear a brilliantly played guitar solo. I don't get excited about that stuff. I'm sorry. It's just not interesting to me. There's an awful lot of people who can do it. What I get excited about is smart, brilliant, unexpected creativity. And like when something like really like glows with creativity, that's when I'll go to war for it. You know what I mean?
And on that point of going to war for it, once your role, however long it takes for you to do this role as chair of the Ivor Novellos is over, what do you want to be different? What do you want to look back and go, okay, well, that's what we managed during that time frame? And that might be difficult because what you're trying to achieve might take decades, but what do you want to be different?
Well, things are already different. You know what I mean? It's important to sort of realize the things that we got out of it. We got the major labels to forgive unrecouped debts.
Yeah.
That is a direct. Yeah. So Sony have said it's always going to be 20 years behind or whatever. So that's they're rolling now. The others ought to, whether or not they're actually doing it is another question. But they agreed to it. We just started this process of sorting out metadata. We got the entire industry to sign up to a code of practice with a 2-year work stream attached to it to make sure that song data ends up attached to recordings so that people get paid. That is something that we didn't have 2 years ago. We are hopefully there's going to be some announcements around contract transparency. Yep. So that's hopefully coming down the pipe shortly. And of course, this create remuneration group, which, if we can get some compromises out of that, you see, for me, it's just, again, because I am such a political person, I do believe in marginal gain. I think everything in life is marginal. It's that one chord that makes the song great. It's that one, I think it's like, it's a funny thing what can improve your day, isn't it? Like it can just be that one cup of coffee or that one chat you had with that one person who said something nice to you, right? and also the world is like that. You know, if you can change the world in one small, even discreet way for the better, that probably is going to improve a lot of people's lives. And so for me, it's like, no, I mean, the nicest thing that happened to me actually was the most brilliant thing was when I was right after Sony came out saying they were forgiving debt. I got an email from the manager of a New Orleans jazz band who have played together since they were kids, and half of them are dead and they're all in their 70s. And they, as a result of that, were going to get paid for the first time in their lives from their back catalogue, from their Columbia records they made in the 70s. And he just wrote to me to thank me. And it was like, fucking hell. Look
Amazing.
at that.
Listen, you should be really proud of the stuff you're doing, and you're still early on in your career doing some of this stuff. So, you know, who knows what you'll be, who knows the trees you'll be uprooting over the next kind of couple of decades. But listen, I want to thank you for your wisdom, your insight, your vulnerability, you know, being so reflective today as well. Keep fighting the good fight. And our listeners, our army of listeners will be behind you every step of the way, and they'll be writing their letters to the MPs right now, I do hope. And listen, Tom, thanks for being such a great guest on the StageLeft podcast. Bye.
Pleasure, dude. Take care.
For more episodes featuring comedian Stuart Lee, Tony Visconti, Gem Archer of Oasis, David Bowie bassist Gail Ann Dorsey, Queen's musical director Spike Edney, the police manager Miles Copeland III, Kate Nash, Ian Brodie, Stormzy producer Fraser T. Smith, Katie Cole of the Smashing Pumpkins, Clive Deemer of Radiohead, and Richard Fortas of Guns N' Roses, go to thestageleftpodcast.com and drop us a DM on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter to let us know what your biggest takeaway was from each interview. Search the Stage Left Pod and you'll find us.